Hey everybody, welcome back to our Luke Deep Dive. Today we are looking at one of Jesus' most famous parables, the parable of the Good Samaritan. It is a great and rich story, and so I'm excited to dive in. It begins with a person called an expert in the law approaching Jesus, and it says that particularly he wanted to put Jesus to the test. An expert in the law was also known as a scribe, someone whose job it was to study and know the Old Testament teachings kind of inside and out. And so this is someone who is a Jewish scholar to the core. And so they're asking Jesus this question to test him. They believe they already know the answer to this question. They're not asking out of curiosity. But the question that he asks is quite interesting. He says, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, before we go any further, it's really helpful to understand what he means by that question. When Christians often think of that phrase, eternal life, what they think is that means life in heaven after death. We usually say that like when Jesus has died and rises again, if we believe in him, then we too get to go to heaven and be with Jesus after death. But is that what that word means? The Greek rendition of this is actually zoe aeon. Aeon or eon is a word that means age or era. And the phrase is not actually eternal life, but life in the age. What must I do to inherit life in the age? Now, I don't have time to really get into this, but the Bible Project has a really good video about what this phrase means that I'll link below. But the very summary version of it is that life in the age simply means, what must I do to align myself with the way that God is doing things, to be on God's side. And it has an implication, not just sometime in the future after death, but in the here and now. And so we are currently living in an age where we are not aligned with God's will and God's goodness and in God's grace. And the life in the age, or when God is, how God operates and how God is doing things. This guy is curious, how can I align myself with God's way and what God is doing? Just both now and into the future. So I have the promises of God to be true for me as well. And Jesus asked him a question back. What's written in the law, in the Jewish law? How do you read it? And he summarizes the law the same way that Jesus does. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. These come from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, and from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Jesus himself kind of summarizes the whole of the Jewish law into these two commands, love God and love others. And so this guy, he knows, he's really well versed on how to understand and interpret and summarize what the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament says. And Jesus says, good job, you've answered correctly. Do those things and you will live. You will have life in the age. In God, you will be part of God's kingdom. But the story doesn't end there. It says he wanted to justify himself, which means he wanted to prove himself or make Jesus look silly, or he wanted to kind of get some kind of reward that he was doing these things right. So he asked this question to Jesus, who is my neighbor? Which presumes that he thinks he already knows the answer and that he's already doing that answer. But what Jesus says throws him for a loop, and we'll see why at the end of the story. This question, who is my neighbor, prompts Jesus to tell a story, a parable, the story of the Good Samaritan. And it goes like this. A man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, which means he was most likely a Jewish person. There's two Jewish cities. Jerusalem is the center of Jewish worship. So most likely he had come there to go to the temple to worship or make sacrifices or to pray. And he was returning home to Jericho. While he was doing this, he's attacked by robbers. They strip him, beat him, and leave him half dead. Then we are told a priest. You might think of this as the same as a pastor. The priest is employed in the service of the temple or the synagogue. It was their job to be God's representative to the people around them, to know the Jewish law, to practice it, to show kindness and generosity to people, and show people what God is like. They are the pastors of that day and age. So the priest happened to be going down the side of the same road, and when he saw him, he went a wide loop around him, passed him by the other side. So too, a Levite came and saw him. A Levite is similar to a priest. They were the helpers, the facilitators of Jewish religious life in the temple and in the synagogue. You might think of them as like a worship leader or something like that. And so a Levite, someone who has dedicated their life to serving God and others, also comes down the same road. He sees this person and passes by on the other side. But then a Samaritan comes. Samaritans were known as kind of half-breeds. They were kind of this group that was considered an enemy to the Jewish people. There's a whole history behind this word, that when the Jewish people were exiled by the Assyrians and later the Babylonians, Samaritans were some of the Jewish people who happened to remain during that exile. They remained in the land, but while the mass people had been deported and exiled to these other countries, these people had remained, and foreign people, Babylonians, Assyrians, had come in to Israel, and they basically made it their home. So these Jewish people then married and had kids with these foreigners, these invaders, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and then they raised their own kids and became what's called as the Samaritans. And so when the Jewish people returned from exile, they met these people who they considered half-breeds, who sort of surrendered to the enemy and willingly started families with these people. And so good, faithful Jewish people looked down on Samaritans as people who sold themselves out so that they might live. So this Samaritan comes. When he sees this man, he takes pity on him. And he goes to extravagant means. He bandages him, he puts medicine on him, he takes him to an inn, he gives money to the innkeeper to take care of him, he offers to reimburse whatever the innkeeper has to pay out of his own expenses to care for this man. This would have been a really shocking moment for this person asking this question in the crowd, because it's not the two familiar, godly people who care for this man who's been beaten. The two people who should have naturally responded, it's the enemy, the half-breed, the sellout that is doing the caring. And then Jesus says to this man, which one of these three men in the story do you think was the true neighbor of the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert of the law can't even respond. He says, the one who had mercy on him. He can't even name the Samaritan man. He just said, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. This would have been significantly controversial, very shocking. And today it might be something like a group that we often, or our Western society maybe thinks of as foreigners or the bad guys or the evil ones. That person is walking down the road, and a pastor walks by, a worship leader walks by, and they see someone in need and they do nothing. But then the foreigner, or whoever we want to substitute in there as the bad guy, is the one that takes care of him. And Jesus makes an example saying, this is what we are called to do. Regardless of these national boundaries that we have, or this tribalism that we have, or the way that we view people, we are meant to overcome all of those things that divide us, because God calls us to care for one another as people made in his image. And this is what the Samaritan person does. And the Jewish teacher of the law is so disgusted that he can't even name him, that he just says, the one who had mercy on him. I think what we are meant to take away from this really incredible story isn't just that, someone showed compassion to this person, but this person overcame a number of cultural, societal obstacles to show deep love and compassion and generosity to someone that was considered his enemy. And so the question for us, the challenge in this lesson for us, is Jesus is calling us to go and do likewise. So who are those people in your life that are in need that maybe you would consider kind of off limits? That you're like, I want nothing to do with them. I wouldn't want to care for them. I don't want to go the extra mile for them. I don't want to extend myself for them because they're different. They think differently than me. They look differently than me. They're from a different culture or background or whatever than me. Why would I ever want to care for someone like that? Jesus is calling us to engage, to go beyond those things that separate us, and to treat other people like they are made in the image of God, regardless of their nationality or their sexual identity or whatever that may be. And we are called to show the same generosity that this man in the story does. It's a really radical teaching and it's really hard to swallow, but this is the essence of what it means to follow and live like Jesus. Because in the end, Jesus is the one who died for everyone who is an enemy to God. While we were still sinners, Paul says, Christ died for us. And we then ought to go and do likewise for others. So where are those people or places or boundaries that you need to break down in order to show love and compassion to someone? And how might you do that this week? I'll leave you with that challenge, and we'll catch you next time. See you later. Bye.